Hello there, everyone. I'm Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and you have joined me for episode number 14 of the Weekly Ratchet. I'm going to say right here at the top of the episode, it's all Katie and Greg's fault, and I'll explain here on the Weekly Ratchet. That's right, folks. Welcome to episode number 14 of the Ratchet. Thanks for joining us. Happy to have you here. Hope everyone is having a very good week. I'll tell you right now that there is a pretty decent storm blowing over here in Ashland, Virginia, so hopefully the lights will stay on. I'll also say that this is episode number 14. If you did not catch episode number 13, or especially if you only tuned in for the question of the week, and I know who you are. Actually, I have no idea who you are. But anyways, go and check that episode out, because the last half of that with my good friends Katie and Greg Barley of the Meeple Society, we had a ton of fun recording the recently played games. We played a ton of games last week. And in fact, I'm a little bummed because I know that this episode and the next few are probably going to pale in comparison to just how much fun we had, how many games we got to play, and just that overall experience. So go check out that episode if you didn't catch it. It was a lot of fun. Let me go ahead and jump into recently acquired games. Now, this one I forgot to mention last week because this was kind of a throwaway. In fact, Katie and Greg sort of donated this to the cause, if you will. This is Killer Bunnies. This is an older game, 2002 release, something I have always kind of wanted to play. And I'm going to talk about it here in a little bit. They donated this. They actually gave me two copies. One is over at the cabin. The other one is here. So I'll get back to that in a little bit. Also, very excited for this. Wormwood is back. This is actually the copy that I had in some of the recent episodes that I talked about. Cassandra Chowdhury, sort of the co-designer of the game, was very, very kind enough to send this back to me. I want to try and work on some additional content for it. I'm also going to try and take it around some local game stores. I'm hoping I can get some tournaments or something in effect when this game finally comes out sometime next year. I've really just had a lot of fun with this. That is Wormwood. Also, and this is where Katie and Greg are going to also be to blame, Hissy Fit showed up. So I mentioned this in last week's episode. We played this the first night that they were there, had a lot of fun with it. I knew that the family was going to enjoy it. A cooperative game about trying to get a cat into a cat carrier. We will get this played very, very soon here at home, I can assure you. And then this last one, I'm a little embarrassed about, and I'll tell you why. Because last week I said this. I did win, I really enjoyed it, and I see all the elements of it of a game that I would really like. I just don't know that it's worth. This is at least $220 bucks. I don't know if it's worth adding, but clearly I lied, because here it is, the massive 10th anniversary edition of Firefly the game, and I'll talk about this one here in a little bit. I had a feeling I wasn't going to be able to hold out for very long, so here it is. And that's actually it for all the newly acquired games. Let me go ahead and jump us into Question of the Week. Okay, into Question of the Week. Last week I asked you your thoughts on house ruling games, what you thought about house rules in games, and, maybe a game that you have house ruled in the past and maybe how that kind of worked out for you. I got a lot of responses. This conversation actually took me to some places that I didn't really see myself getting into, and I've got, I think, some neat stuff I want to talk about here. So I'm going to go ahead and get through the comments real quick and then get to some of my thoughts. So most folks said that they were okay with house rules, although some folks don't really get into them. Like, for example, Kay, who said that they have never house ruled any games, but they are good with trying it if it improves the experience. And then you're going to see that consensus kind of a lot throughout these comments. For example, Simulation Chris said he's not against house rules either, but rarely does, usually when it adds more variety, like adding cards to a market or cycling out cards to provide more options. And I am very much on board with this. I'll talk about it more here in just a moment. But yes, I think if, especially open world games give you markets and such to buy from, sometimes you only get 3 cards. Imagine if you had just 25% more or 33% more options. Just one more card would give you so much more agency in what you could do, in that market, in that game. So I certainly agree with those. Some folks do house rules a little bit, or they house rule their games just a little bit. For example, Mark said that he usually house rules games if he's not getting enough enjoyment or feels restricted. And he mentioned both a Wingspan and a Wonderful World house rule that they use to open up the options of those games. He also talked about checking out house rules on Board Game Geek, and I agree there are a ton of variants and player-made content and ideas out there on Board Game Geek. I have seen entire solo modes for games. I have seen campaigns added to non-campaign games. Tons of stuff out there. Sometimes they're a little bit of work to get through, and I will say that not all of them work that well. There was a solo mode to Anno 1800. I just didn't care for it all because I could see how it could easily be manipulated, and it just didn't click with me. But it's certainly out there if you want to go and check it out. And I just completely closed down my software. All right, let's try this again. Rentless said that house rules can be a bit of a gamble, and he only adds them if they're really needed. He went on to give a Catan reference that I will admit I didn't quite follow as, yeah, confession time, I've never played Catan. We had a 2-player dice version that I thought was dumb, and that was years and years and years and years ago, way before we started actually gaming, but I've never played Catan. We also then have folks who house rule games a bit more frequently, like the Meeple Society. Hey, I know those guys. Buyer beware. Nah. They recently did a segment on house ruling games on their podcast, The Meeple Society, where they expressed favoritism towards house rules, especially when they improve the game. And they mentioned a rule they added to Zombicide that can let players reclaim some health. I haven't played that either, so I can't weigh in on that one, but that certainly, makes a lot of sense. And I miss gaming with you guys. Can't wait for us to play some games again. Canuck Chuck said that he probably plays with a lot of house rules because of the way that he interprets rules. He said that he's a bit more liberal in how he sort of interprets the rules, and he basically said that almost all of his games are probably, almost his own house rules because of just how he gets through the rules themselves. And I found that interesting because I learn a lot of games. I learn and I play a lot of different games, rarely play the same game multiple times. And so for me, because I will often see the same system a lot of different ways, I am very keen to wanting to know how the designer intended that game to be played. Yeah, you might house rule it from there, but for example, I think about a deck building game. First question I almost always ask is, where do the purchase cards go? If I'm building onto my deck, do they go into my hand, top of my draw deck, discard pile? Because I've seen all 3 versions. And so little things like that, I feel like I really need to know what the core idea is, and then I can always go from there and say, hey, I might tweak this a little bit. CR Poll asked a very interesting question. He asked if any house rule was so good that it became official. Now, I don't remember 100% accurately, but I want to say that in the Stonemaier game of Viticulture, a very great worker placement game about making wine, I got my W's and my R's mixed up there. It happens all the time. But anyways, in Viticulture, it's a worker placement game and the spots get blocked up. And so there was a Grande worker that was added in the Tuscany expansion that you could then play onto any space to still be able to take that action even if it was full. But each player only got 1 Grande worker for each round of the game. And I really want to say that that was some sort of a house rule or a suggested idea from the community that then got added into Tuscany and then became so popular there that it actually became a core system of the base game with the new Essential Edition of Viticulture. Now, again, I'm going off of something I seem to recall reading a long time ago, so I could be off on that. I definitely know that it was in the expansion and then basically became part of the base game, but I want to say that it was sort of a community-led idea, like, hey, this would be really cool, and that's how it came to be. So that's my take on that one. I also asked this question out on Board Game Revolution Facebook page, and if you're not a member of BGR, maybe stay away from it because it's a pretty nasty community sometimes. But I did get 2 answers that I thought were pretty interesting. The first was from Tom Pancoast. Now, I know Tom. He lives here in the Richmond area. I've met up with him a couple times. We've exchanged some games. I don't think I've ever actually played a game with him. I don't know why, Tom. But hey, he said that he's fine with house rules, but he never uses them. And then he went on to compare house rules with expansions, suggesting that if a game doesn't work without the expansion, he'd rather just not play it, and basically said the same thing for house rules. And I thought that was almost kind of a little on the extreme side, because when I think of a house rule, I think of a little tweak. Again, adding 1 more card to a market, maybe changing a conversion rate from 2 to 1 to 3 to 1 if you're going from coins and resources or whatever. To me, a lot of times, expansions change core concepts of the game. They add a whole new component or completely change the rules of an existing mechanism of the game, and that's usually not what house rules will aim to do, at least not without some hefty effort, right? Because usually you've got new components, new pieces, new cards, new something. that make those expansions work. And again, you're usually not up to the level, usually beyond the level of a house rule at that point. So I thought that was interesting. But my favorite comment came from Clarence Cohen, and I hope I'm saying that right, from Board Game Revolution on Facebook, who said, "Sure to house rules if they make sense. Board games are just a collection of someone else's house rules anyways." And I thought that was pretty, right? Like, that was a really interesting concept. And fundamentally, I agree. When you think about a rule book, that is just what the designer came up with as to how to play their game. Now, I do think that there's there's a line there when it comes to skill, right? When we think about a designer making a game and making the rule book for that game, you're thinking of someone who that's their profession, at least in many cases, and not really always the case, of course, but that person has gone through a lot of effort to make that game the way it is. So I think of it, and as I've been thinking of this topic, I think about the instruction manual for my car, right? I have a Chevrolet Camaro, and I've got a very thick owner's manual on how to take care of that car, when to service the fluids, what kind of fluids to use, what pressures to set the tires at. That book was written and at least sort of put together by an entire team of engineers and designers and everyone else who made that car. They know that car better than I will ever know that car. And so for me to go in and say, I'm going to use a different oil, or I'm going to just set the pressures higher because I think I should, I could probably be doing some real damage to that car because, again, I'm just kind of going off on my own. Now, obviously, that's a completely different way of looking at, say, a board game. You're not going to destroy a game necessarily, I guess, if you kind of house rule it. But I think about the fact that, if you're tweaking something, all you're doing is changing someone else's rules, right? Now, for me personally, I see rules for games in sort of three categories, and I've put a lot of thought in this in the past week. There are three categories that I kind of think of when I think of rules for a game. The one is fundamental or structural, all right? This is the scoring track. This is the military track. This is, what the money is in this game. And you think of those things that basically, this is how the cogs and wheels of this game work. And those are fairly static, right? And then I think about sort of balance, and I think of rules that kind of, make those systems start to jive with each other. And so I'm thinking of a lot of things, but I'm thinking of, okay, again, when you buy a card, it comes into your hand or it goes to your discard pile, or when you purchase something, the money goes to another player or it goes to the bank. I think especially of asymmetrical games, like we played Hegemony last week. I think of Root and Wormwood is a great example too, where you're trying to, the designer is trying to make sure that each faction, though every group is playing a slightly different set of rules, that they are still balanced, that one faction isn't any more powerful than another. And we've seen that get wonky a lot of times. I'm thinking of Tapestry and how they came out with a whole new set of, rules for each of the factions that kind of is supposed to help level that playing field a little more. And then the last thing I think about of a category of rules is ones that establish difficulty. So again, how much does something cost? How many cards do you get to choose from? I think of Pandemic. Pandemic is a cooperative game where you're trying to work together to cure a bunch of diseases spreading across the world. And the one rule, the key rule, is that you can cure a disease when you have 5 cards of the color matching that disease. You have to go to a certain lab, token on the board, turn in 5 cards, cure the disease. Why 5? Why is that the number? Well, that's the number they came up with. You make it 6, it's a heck of a lot harder. You drop it down to 4, it gets a lot easier. So why is it 5? Well, that's the number that Matt Leacock came up with, and that's the difficulty that was set for the game. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like that game, because to me, it's just too frustrating, and I can't find the thematic tie with the number 5, but I digress. So I think a lot of times when we look at house rules, we're usually looking to change those latter two. Maybe we want to make a faction a little bit more balanced. Maybe we want to make a certain aspect of the board, one of the point salad methods of a game, work a little better if players want to focus just on it, as opposed to maybe another system that they feel is too powerful and therefore they can't ignore. And that gets a little wordy, and I apologize, but I'm thinking of Fox Experiment, which I have only played once. So I haven't given any thought to house ruling, but I worked on a particular aspect of that game. One of my friends worked on another aspect and just blew us all out of the water, even though I was really far up here and she was really far up here, and I felt like, well, that should even it out, and it did not even it out. And then I think about, again, that balance and that difficulty kind of a thing. So Mosaic is a civilization game, and I've played this a couple times now. I have a huge copy on the wall, right about up there, actually. And I played this at the Dice Tower a couple of years ago, one of the retreats, and the guy who taught us said, well, hey, the rules say that it's 2 money for every resource. So if you have a bunch of money, you can spend twice the cost and buy whatever you need. So if you need ideas or stone or whatever it was, you can pay 2 money for each resource that you're missing. But they felt that that was too easy, and so they changed it to a 3-to-1 ratio, and that's how we played it for my first game. Later on, when I had the game and I played it, I forgot about that, and we just played it at the 2-to-1. And then I remembered kind of halfway through it, and I was like, well, I don't know. You don't get a whole ton of money in the game. You can, but you're still blowing through it at twice the rate if you're using it to buy resources, and I didn't really see that it made the game any more easier than it was for anybody else. And so I've abandoned that rule. I never really adopted that rule of a 3-to-1 instead of a 2-to-1. But that was something that someone decided, hey, I want the game to be a little bit more of a challenge. And so they modified that rule. So I thought all this was very interesting. I think that, it's our games, right? And I've always kind of said, look, you can play them however you want to play them. If you want to house rule stuff, house rule stuff. I think especially when I play solo games, I break rules all the time because I just want the game to be fun. And I certainly agree with a lot of these comments. If you're not getting enough out of it, or you want more variety, if you've got a game with a deck of cards this big, and at the end of it, you've gone through that many of them, then you're probably not getting your value out of it. So add to the market, draw more cards, increase your, do whatever you want to do. Enjoy your games. And I think that's the core of all of this. So, question for next week. This is a topic that has come up very recently for me. As if any of you noticed, my Voidfall review launched over on the Dice Tower, and it has blown up, as I kind of expected that it would. In fact, I've been intentionally kind of leashing a few viewers away from that review, and it's been a lot of fun to just go out there and comment with folks. But I've gotten a lot of pushback, and I expected as much. I was kind of ready for it. But a lot of folks are saying, oh, no, Voidfall is an epic game. It's a masterpiece. I've seen that word at least 3 times in the comments of that game. It's a masterpiece. And I'm curious, and this might spin off into a whole nother video for me later. What do you think makes a game epic? What do you think makes a game a masterpiece? If I were to ask you what is a masterpiece of a board game, what answer might you give? And why? I definitely like to get into what makes people think that a game is epic and or a masterpiece, because those are the 2 words that keep getting thrown out there, I think with a bit of reckless abandon. And I'm curious, and I've been asking questions. I've been getting answers that have intrigued me. So I'm going to talk about that a bit more next week with the next question of the week. Let's go ahead and jump to recently played games. Okay, time to wrap up the Ratchet with recently played games. And topping off the list here is Neon, which I think I'm going to call Neon the Neon board game. I am so sorry for how bright this shows up in lighting. It's pretty bad. Anyways, this is a tile-laying city-building game. It kind of reminds me of Quadropolis. When that game is kind of finished, you have this grid of tiles in front of you. This is a 5x5 grid, and you're placing these tiles out on it, trying to get a variety of endgame scoring conditions established. You get a couple tiles at the beginning of the game that can give you some some scoring, and then you'll get other tiles throughout the game that may enhance that, may send you in a completely different direction, or may just have some pretty big scores themselves. It's a drafting game. And, it's funny to say, so I played this 2-player with my wife. Now, normally you start off in this game, if you've got 3 or more players, you each start off with 8 tiles, you pick one, you pass, you then go down 7, you pick one, you pass, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. When you get on to 2 tiles left, you play one, you trash the other, and that ends the round. You do that 3 times. Now, in the 2-player game, they say to take those 24 tiles, 8 times 3, 24, and you arrange them in stacks of 3, and then the first player takes a tile, the second player takes a tile, and the third one gets trashed. Then that player would go again, take one of the next pile. First player would take the second one, third one gets trashed. And so each turn you're basically taking, it's turn, if that makes sense. But each time you're either going to have the option of 3 tiles or 2, and that's it. As opposed to in the 3-player game and 4 or 5, you add additional tiles in at the higher player counts, and you get 8 tiles to choose from on your first turn, and then 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And by the time you're getting down to that 2, you kind of have seen some of the other tiles going around. You still don't know what you're going to get, but at least you kind of know, well, guys, hey, I really hope this tile comes back around, and maybe if I get this one, I kind of know where I can stick it, you know? And so you get a little bit of an idea to plan ahead. And I didn't really like that idea of dwindling my options throughout the entire game. So what we did was, my wife and I, we played for a 3-player game. We set a stack of 8 tiles aside for a invisible player. I shuffled it, removed the tile, and then passed around. So that when that player got the stack, it would then shuffle, randomly remove one, and then just pass it on. And that way we got to kind of play with that 3-player experience without having a 3rd player and without having to do what seemed to me like a limiting option of rules. So exactly like what we were talking about is how I played Neon. And I really like this. My wife really enjoyed it. It's very fast. It's a decent sized box, but it actually has a fairly small footprint, especially for a 2-player game. And I think we might be trying to take this like one of the pubs or something later on, because it would play very well. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and it's a lot of fun. That is Neon, the Neon city building game. All right, up next this past week, Daniel joined me here in the treehouse yet again, and we played another game of Epic's Course of Cultures. Now, we talked about this last week with my friends Katie and Greg. I really wanted to introduce Daniel to this as he's a big fan of Civilization games, and this still did not disappoint. I've really been enjoying this. And in fact, Ice Makes, who published this, really liked the video, so I put a video out on the channel here last week, just talking about the game in general, kind of a high-level, well-published review, a well-produced review, and now I think I'm going to try to take a more casual approach. I'm going to do another video on this, kind of picking down in the weeds a little bit on it, not going into the rules or the gameplay or the turn structure and that kind of stuff, but talking about, they're describing this as a 4X. I'm going to say whether or not I agree with that, and maybe compare it to some other Civilization-type games like Mosaic. What's the other one I was just thinking of? Through the Ages. I can't remember the full name of that game, but Through the Ages is the one, and then they asked for Clash of Cultures, which I have over here, and I still have not yet played. So anyways, there'll be more content on Epics coming out. We had a good game of it. I did win this one, which, I had a little bit of a first play advantage, although I did score lower my second time. The only thing we're still not sure about this, well, I'll talk a little bit more about rules here in a moment with this designer and this company, but we still haven't quite figured out the way that the combat is supposed to work or how it's actually beneficial. There is combat in the game. It's very, very scantily covered in the rule book, and we just don't really get how it actually benefits anyways. But anyways, still a really neat game, and I'll chat about Epics a little bit more. That's quite heavy. Let's see. Up next, is this one. Very different size-wise. But this is by the same designer and the same publisher. This is Age of Galaxy, also by Jeffrey CCH and Ice Makes. This is his second in this kind of age line. The first one was Age of Civilization. You can play that out on Board Game Arena if you're inclined. Both of these are very, obviously, small package games that pack a pretty decent wallop of rules and technique. Both of them, Age of Civilization and Age of Galaxy. I have Civilization over here somewhere. But they use a combination of systems. So you have these cards that come out. Age of Civilization, if I remember, you kind of have this card that moves down this row, and each row it adds and removes actions that can be available to you. So it kind of changes up the game. You've got a couple of default actions you can always take, but then this moving card adds and new options roll in, new options roll off. And then it uses a system where you're playing these civilization cards, and you can kind of, the first one picks your culture, and then the second one's sort of stack above or below, or maybe both, to add to what that culture is able to do. So you no longer play it for its core ability. It's a multi-use card game kind of a thing. And Age of Galaxy does a lot of that and a lot more. So in this, you've got these galaxy cards that come out. You're sort of slowly moving across the galaxy. You can take over planets one of two ways. You can colonize them, or you can sort of militarily conquer them. You're playing civilization cards to give you certain abilities. They may just give you some basic resources. Some of them may also establish some engine building mechanisms. They may establish some new technologies that you can research and only you can research. And you get to play 3 of these throughout the game. And then the majority of these symbols that may come out can also set you up for some endgame scoring. There's a lot in this little box. We were quite surprised. Now, the problem is that I feel like for this and Epics and even Age of Civilization, the rules are 90% there. And I'm not even talking about just fringe case stuff, but I'm talking about in Epics, there's a card that says, well, this military can move through grass. But it never explains what that means. It just completely leaves it out. Now, it's still a rough draft of the rules on that one, so we were okay with that. But in Galaxy, it said, okay, this card says get a point for each of your planets. Well, as I mentioned, you can get planets one or two ways, and we weren't quite sure because you acquire them at different times of the game. So we weren't sure that if you've conquered a planet militarily, which has a ship on it, versus colonizing it, which has a cube on it, do those both count as acquiring a planet? We had to go online. We found the answer. Okay, yeah, we got it. But again, you shouldn't have to do that. If it's a real fringe case thing, okay, fine. But this is a core mechanism of the game that just doesn't answer all the questions, and that can be really frustrating. So we had some issues with this. I still have some issues with Epics, and I'm chatting with them. I'm like, hey, make sure this goes in the rule book. But we still had a lot of fun with this. And my wife actually beat me in Age of Galaxy by 1 point, and I do believe that's with us playing the rules correctly. There's a ton of stuff in this little box, and I recommend it. Age of Galaxy. Okay. Ooh, almost fell off the chair. Okay. Then we played this one. Firefly, the 10th anniversary board game. Now, I'm not going to go too big into this because it's a big box. But this game's really not that daunting. First of all, what you've got in this box is a lot of open space, let's be honest. But there's a tray in the bottom for like 16 different decks of cards. That's probably an exaggeration, but it's a big number. And each deck will have a main deck and a discard pile throughout the whole game. So it takes a ton of space. Katie taught me a trick last week of having little business card holders. They just delivered from Amazon earlier today, so I'll be able to organize this a little better. I never watched the TV show. I mentioned it last week that I've never watched the Firefly show. Now, as soon as Katie and Greg tootled away on back to Indianapolis, we started watching it that night. We're about 4 episodes in, and I'm enjoying it. It's definitely a show that's 22 years old, and it shows every bit of it. And I think it was also a bit of a low budget, probably that first and only year, but we have still been enjoying the show. But you don't need to know it to enjoy this game. This is a open world, sort of do whatever the heck you want to do kind of game. It reminds me a lot of, and I'm blanking on the name, the Western Legends game. It reminds me of Xayah. Both of those are very open world games. The thing with those is that there's a ton of different rules for every different type of space that you're going to. And there really isn't that in this game. There are different places, but they all kind of act the same. If it's a market, you can shop from things. And there's 8 markets. If it's a job contact, you can go and get jobs from them, and there's a whole bunch of those as well. But it doesn't matter what part of the map they're in. It doesn't matter if they're in the friendly space or the risky space or the super dangerous space. They still work the same way. The only thing that you get in some fringe cases with is as you're actually tackling some of those jobs, they tend to act differently because you have legal jobs, illegal jobs, and immoral jobs, and how they sort of interact with your crew on the ship that you're flying, and how some of these misbehaving cards that come out, especially when you're doing the illegal actions, can get a little wonky. So we had to hit the rulebook a little bit for this, but not that much. We kind of fell into the rhythm pretty quick, and we had a very fun game. Now, what I have found interesting with this, and again, just my wife and I played this time, is that the first couple of times I played this, I went for a minimalist approach, where I was like, okay, I'm skeleton crew, very, very simple missions, all legal, that I can just knock out, back and forth, pick up and deliver, real simple stuff. For this playthrough, I tried to go a little bit more extreme. I tried to, okay, I'm going to get a bigger crew. I'm going to go from a legal job, some higher paying gigs. Except then you got to pay more money to your crew. It takes a lot more time to build up that crew. I still ran into some situations that took out some crew, and it was difficult. And my wife played the minimalist approach, and she won. So I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm not giving up on it anytime soon. I just hope that I can find the better way to play the game successfully, going a little bit more all in, doing the more illegal jobs, doing the bigger jobs, being a little more dangerous, and hopefully finding the way that risk can pay off in better rewards. But still having a lot of fun with Firefly. And of course, it's the 10th anniversary edition, right? What better way to get everything that there has ever been for a game than one massive box? It wasn't really even that expensive. Probably saved me a ton of money from just trying to piecemeal all the expansions. Having a lot of fun with Firefly. Okay, last game to talk about this week. Killer Bunnies. I mentioned that this is a 2002 game. This came out 4 years before my wife and I got married. We have an almost 12-year-old daughter. So it's an old game. I have always known about this game, and I've always kind of wanted to play it. And I don't even know why I never did, because it says 2 to 8 players. I always seemed to think that it was a 3 and up player game, which is why I never got it. And I know that like a lot of these kind of party-ish card games, it's better at higher player counts. But we got this, and I thought, my wife and daughter and I love Exploding Kittens. This has got to be somewhat parallel to that. We took it to a pub just yesterday, and we played this, and it was sheer crap. This game was terrible. The whole premise of this, and I won't go deep into this, but it's something I've been waiting for a long time, right? The premise of this is you got a bunch of cards, and it's like 150 cards, and you're trying to get bunnies out. Once you have bunnies out, then you can play some other cards. You're ultimately trying to collect carrot cards. There are 20 carrot cards in the game, and then there's a separate deck of another 20 carrot cards. And at the end of the game, when the last main carrot card has been taken, the first deck of 20 is drained, you then break out the separate deck, smaller cards, same numbering. Each carrot is identified, numbered 1 through 20. You shuffle that deck, you pull off one card. And whoever has that carrot wins the game. So I could get 18 of them, my daughter could get 2, and if hers gets pulled, she wins. That's it. You have to have a bunny to win, and the game makes it sound like, well, okay, at the beginning of the game, if you get dealt a bunch of cards, you don't have a bunny, well, just go ahead and find a bunny in the deck and stick it in your hand. No problem. That won't happen very often. Bullshit. I played about 8 to 10 turns right off the get-go, never drew a bunny. Finally got a couple. My daughter had a butt ton of them, except for we kept taking them out. And there are cards that you can draw that just makes you kill one of your rabbits, period. Can't avoid it, nothing you could do. There goes your bunny. I finally got a couple going, and then my wife went a streak of about 10 rounds where she just could not draw any bunny cards. And some cards that you want to play, you have to have a bunny out to even use them, so you just got to trash them if you don't have a rabbit. And there's also this kind of programming mode in that you always have your next 2 cards queued up. Now, there are kind of ways around that, but you kind of have to plan a little bit ahead, but you have no idea what your opponent's going to throw at you. Okay, now I got a rabbit out. I'm going to do all this stuff. Boom, he's dead. Trash this card, trash that card. This game sucks. And what just killed this one for us was that I had a bunch of carrot cards. I had just gotten a bunch of cards list. You just go and get them. I drew some random money out of the deck. I got to buy a couple. I had a whole bunch of carrot cards, maybe 10 of them. My wife had 1. I think my daughter had 2. My daughter then plays a card on me, the right thing to do, that said, play this to a player, and they have to pay $2 for each one of their carrot cards, or they lose it. I had no money. Nothing. I had just bought some more carrots, and I had to completely discard my entire stack back to the supply. And I said, well, we are done playing with this. And my wife, who had a miserable last 10 rounds, said, no argument here, threw in her cards. Mel thought it was funny that she took her dad out. She was happy with it, and that was the end of the game. And we will probably, most likely, never play this again. I am, this would be like, the teenage me, maybe, I'm a little older than that, meeting that celebrity crush or whatever and finding out that they're a complete a-hole. That's how it felt for me to play this game that I have always been curious about, and now I have it, and it's crap. So, thank you very much, Katie and Greg, for donating this. I'll make sure to burn it with dignity. All right, folks, that is the end of the Weekly Ratchet. Thanks again for tuning in. Another quick welcome to all the new subscribers here to Tabletop Toolbox. I hope that if you're seeing this, throw some comments in the comments. Let me know what you think of the show. Say hey, tell us where you're from, tell us your favorite games, whatever you want to do. Answer the question of the week. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to get some more participation into the Weekly Ratchet episode. So, thanks again for joining us. I will catch you next week. Cheers.